The doctor gave me 6 months. Terminal. That news wasn't just a death sentence, it was the final clarity I needed. I had $250,000 set aside, my death fund, money for my final dignity. But as my children argued over who got the grandfather clock before I was even cold, I realized that money wasn't meant for my coffin. It was meant for the fight of my life. I took that entire fund, every penny I had, and did something unspeakable. I used my impending death to secretly buy every single outstanding debt my son owed. I faked my death to save his life. I lied to my family for 6 months, and what they did to me when they thought I was dying? You won't believe it. The twist wasn't the cancer. The twist was my wallet. And when I reveal my secret, my family will lose everything. Before we dive into this 1-hour truth bomb, tell me in the comments below, where are you watching this video from? And please, share this story and subscribe for more. The air in the dining room was thick, not with anticipation, but with the smell of my perfectly roasted chicken, a farewell meal I hadn't told them was farewell. My son, Julian, 32, a man whose charm was rivaled only by his debt, was picking at his mashed potatoes, already asking about borrowing my car. My daughter, Vanessa, 28, a fiercely ambitious lawyer, kept glancing at her watch. They don't see me, Eleanor, they see a convenience, I thought bitterly. I cleared my throat, the sound a ragged edge in the silence. I have something important to tell you. Julian stopped chewing. Vanessa finally looked up. I delivered the lie, the one Dr. Chen had reluctantly helped me craft, a very aggressive, fast-moving lung issue. I used clinical terms, keeping my voice steady. Julian's fork clattered. Vanessa's composure, however, was the first real twist. She didn't weep. She didn't hug me. She frowned and asked, "Did you update your will, Mom?" That was my confirmation. The game was on. Julian, bless his reckless heart, did finally cry. He buried his face in my shoulder, his sobs shaking me. "Mom, no, please, you can't go." He sounded genuinely devastated. For a second, the guilt, a sharp, twisting knife, almost made me confess. He loves me. He's just lost, I tried to tell myself. But then he pulled back, wiping his eyes, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mom, about the house, you know I've always wanted to turn the basement into an Airbnb. Will you sign the papers now? Just in case?" The mask had slipped. His tears were real, but they were also watered with self-interest. The house? Already? Before the dirt is even settled over my grave? Later that night, sitting alone, I pulled out the ledger. It wasn't my will. It was the detailed, horrifying list of Julian's outstanding loans, a bank loan, 2 credit cards maxed out, and a looming private investor I didn't even want to think about. The total, $212,000. My death fund was exactly $250,000. The money was meant to be my final dignity. Now, it was going to be my final act of defiance, and love. Vanessa called an emergency family strategy session the next morning. I watched them in the living room, whispering in hushed, serious tones, like board members dividing assets. "We need to talk about Mom's care," Vanessa announced, looking more like she was cross-examining a hostile witness than caring for her mother. Julian was nodding too enthusiastically. "Yes, Mom needs to be comfortable. We should probably start looking at hospices, right, Nessa? The really nice ones that are efficient." Twist number 3 hit me like a physical blow. They weren't discussing how to spend time with me, they were discussing how to manage my decline. "I'm not ready for a hospice," I stated, my voice dangerously even. Vanessa immediately pivoted. "Of course not, Mom. But the finances. You haven't touched the death fund, have you?" We need to make sure that money is safe for the burial and the settlement. Settlement. She means her cut. I smiled inwardly. My perfect, ambitious daughter was about to learn that my fund wasn't an inheritance, it was a weapon. In the following days, I started receiving calls. Short, cryptic, and always delivered with a veneer of concern. Eleanor, dear, I heard the awful news. I want to respect your privacy, but... It was my cousin, Martha, a woman I hadn't seen in 5 years, suddenly asking about the vintage diamond brooch I owned. Then my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, casually mentioning how Julian had told her I was downsizing my furniture early. Downsizing. They're already picking over the carcass. This realization, that my children were actively spreading the news and positioning themselves for a payout, was the real terminal diagnosis. I decided to accelerate my plan. I called my banker, Mr. Davies, a trusted family friend. I used the code phrase we'd established months ago, when the first whispers of Julian's death started to trouble my sleep. It's time to settle the Vance accounts. I told him I needed to start buying the debt. Not paying it, but acquiring it. I wanted the leverage. I needed the final, undeniable proof of my son's recklessness to protect him from himself. The heavy rain outside mirrored the sudden surge of grief I felt, not for my health, but for the lost innocence of motherhood. I remembered Julian at 10, his eyes wide with fear after crashing his bicycle, promising, "Mom, I'll pay for the new tire. I promise." He meant it then. Now, at 32, that boy was lost under layers of entitlement. Where did I go wrong? Was I too soft? Too quick to bail him out? I closed my eyes, remembering the conversation with my late husband, David, 10 years ago. We were setting up the fund. "This is for you, Ellie," David had insisted. "For your peace of mind, for your dignity." Or maybe, I'd replied, "It's for our children's undignified moments. A safety net for when they crash and burn." A forgotten detail, a conversation held in jest, now felt like a divine premonition. I wasn't betraying David's legacy, I was fulfilling a terrible, unspoken prophecy. I was buying Julian's freedom, whether he deserved it or not. Mr. Davies called back, his voice tight. "Eleanor, the bank loans and cards are manageable. But Julian has a private creditor. A man named Silas. He's holding a lien on a fractional interest in your father's old hunting cabin property in Vermont. A property dispute. A secret I didn't know existed." My heart hammered. Julian wasn't just drowning, he was pulling family assets down with him. The Vermont cabin was supposed to be a shared family inheritance, not collateral for a loan shark. "Silas wants $70,000 and he wants it fast, Eleanor. He's threatening foreclosure on the fractional interest." The twist was getting sharper. "Buy it, Mr. Davies," I whispered. "Buy all of it. I want that debt, and that piece of paper, in my name by the end of the week." The thought of Vanessa finding out about the cabin before I had secured it fueled a cold, protective rage. This wasn't just about Julian anymore, it was about protecting my own father's legacy from his reckless hands. Vanessa showed up with a laminated spreadsheet, the Vance family end-of-life resource allocation and care schedule. I looked at the color-coded sections: weekly visiting hours, 1.5 hours max, executor designation, and, most galling, sale of non-essential assets, antiques, jewelry. "Mom, we need to be realistic," she said, tapping a column. "The cost of your care is significant. Julian and I have decided to sell the grandfather clock and the Persian rugs to cover the initial expenses. It's fiscally responsible." Her tone was entirely devoid of warmth, all logic, and zero heart. "Who gave you permission to sell my belongings, Vanessa?" My voice was low, lethal. She bristled. "We're your children, Mom. We're making arrangements. Unless you've already spent the death fund." The sheer audacity made me dizzy. They see my death as a corporate merger, and I'm the asset being liquidated. I looked at the rug, a gift from my late husband. The rug stays, I said, standing up. And so does the clock. My assets are not for sale. Not yet. Julian came by that evening, sheepish and overly solicitous. He brought me a single, wilted rose. I'm sorry about Nessa, Mom. She's just stressed. He sat on the edge of the sofa, looking around the room with a possessive air. I just want you to know, I'm going to take care of everything. I'm going to honor you. And then, the new, deeper twist. He pulled out his phone. There's someone, a friend. She's been a rock. I want you to meet her, Mom, before. He trailed off. The woman on the screen was stunning, but what caught my breath was the context. It was Maria, his best friend's wife. A forbidden love, hiding in plain sight. My son is in over his head, not just with money, but with a life-shattering secret that will destroy two families. The guilt returned, but now it was for his inevitable ruin. This wasn't just about debt anymore. This was about a complete and utter moral collapse. I knew then that buying his debt was the only way to sever him from the other dangerous aspects of his life. 2 days later, I was in Mr. Davies's office. He handed me a stack of documents. They weren't just receipts, they were instruments of acquisition. Eleanor, you now legally own Julian Vance's outstanding debt to 3 institutions and a fractional piece of property lien held by a private party. The final cost, $212,350. My fund was depleted, save for a small reserve. I signed the last document, my signature firm, a small, victorious flourish. It is done. The ultimate sacrifice. His freedom is secured. Davies looked troubled. Eleanor, I have to ask. Why this elaborate deception? Why not just pay the debt as his mother? I looked at the signed papers, the tangible evidence of his failure. Because, Mr. Davies, if I just pay it, he learns nothing and will do it again. But if he thinks he has to grovel for money from his dying mother, if he thinks his life is about to get financially worse, that's a lesson. And I need to know how far they will sink before I save him. The betrayal was my test, the debt was my curriculum. Vanessa was frantic. She had been pestering me for my bank account details for a week, citing estate planning and liquidity assessments. Mom, the death fund. Where is it? I need to verify the balance before the solicitor's meeting. I gave her the exact account number and the old password. She left, triumphant. An hour later, her call was a torrent of fury. Mom. The account is empty. $37,650 left. Where is the money? Her voice was shrill, the thin veneer of her caring daughter character completely cracked. That's not possible, dear, I said calmly, stirring my tea. Are you sure you checked the date? Perhaps there was an error. I let the silence hang, letting her mind race to the worst possible conclusion, that I had irresponsibly spent the money on a last-minute trip or frivolous items. The panic in her voice wasn't for my financial security, but for her anticipated loss of inheritance. Good. Let them sweat. Let them see the value of what they took for granted. Julian arrived, pale and agitated. He didn't ask about the money, he immediately asked about the Vermont cabin. Mom, do you still have that lien document from the hunting cabin? I need to see it. The fear in his eyes was real. He knew Silas wasn't a man to cross. No, honey, I don't know what you're talking about, I lied easily. It's all in the hands of my lawyer, the one handling my final affairs. He slumped, the reality of his potentially lost inheritance and the looming threat of the private creditor crashing down on him. He tried to charm me, telling me he wanted to take me on one last vacation with my money. I realized he was desperate to find out if I had paid Silas. His desperation fueled my resolve. He's a drowning man, grabbing at everything. I have to be the life raft, not the water he sinks in. I promised him nothing, only a vague, "We'll discuss it when I'm feeling better." I spent the afternoon watching old home videos. Julian's high school graduation, Vanessa's first piano recital. My husband, David, standing tall and laughing. "Oh, David, what a mess I've made." Or maybe, "What a fix I'm about to put in." I began to notice the small, telling details of their behavior. Julian stopped bringing me my favorite cookies but started dropping hints about wanting the key to the safe deposit box. Vanessa stopped calling to check on my symptoms but called twice a day to confirm I was still of sound mind to manage my estate. Their care had become transactional, a performance for the benefit of my will. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet, insidious, a slow decay of their character that only my impending death could illuminate. I felt a profound, chilling distance from them, a feeling that my life was already a memory they were trying to profit from. The pressure escalated when Vanessa, under the guise of tidying up, demanded the safe deposit key. "It's just safer, Mom. We don't want it falling into the wrong hands." I looked at her, my hand clutching the small, cold brass key in my pocket. "It's lost, dear. I must have misplaced it when I was packing away my winter things." The lie was effortless now. The twist was that the key wasn't lost, it was the entire point. The safe deposit box contained only one item, the official document from Mr. Davies, stating that the holding company, Vance Family Financial Solutions, LLC, now legally owned all of Julian's debt. It was the key to my grand reveal, my insurance policy against their future denial. I needed them to believe I was failing, mentally and physically, so the shock of my resurgence would be total. Dr. Chen, a wonderful man who understood the profound depth of my strategy, agreed to one final, dramatic flourish. He came to the house, ostensibly for a check-in. Julian and Vanessa were both present, hanging on his every word, their concern bordering on morbid eagerness. "Eleanor, your markers are concerning," he said gravely, looking directly at them. He handed me a prescription that was really a shopping list for a fine Italian dinner. "I suggest you make every moment count." His performance was Oscar-worthy. Their reactions were repulsive. Julian started suggesting a yard sale for my collectibles to raise some cheer. Vanessa offered to pre-pack my expensive china. I watched them, my heart a stone. These aren't my children. These are two cold-blooded accountants valuing their potential earnings. I knew, in that moment, that there was no turning back. The curtain was ready to be dropped on their selfish charade. I sent out a formal invitation. Final family dinner. Sunday at 7 p.m. Attendance is mandatory. The tone was commanding, leaving no room for excuses. Julian called immediately. "Mom, why so formal?" "Because, son," I said, "some things require a proper setting. I have an announcement to make about my final arrangements." I could hear the greed sharpen in his voice. Vanessa called 10 minutes later. "Mom, are you sure you're up to it? You shouldn't stress yourself. Just tell us over the phone." "No, darling," I purred. "This needs to be face to face. I need to look into the eyes of the people I'm providing for." I was laying the emotional trap, baiting them with the promise of a clear, unencumbered inheritance. The dining room, where I had told them the lie, would be the scene of the truth. I was preparing a meal that would either nourish my family or utterly destroy their expectations. Saturday was spent cleaning, not just the house, but my conscience. I bought a spectacular, vibrant red dress, the color of life and fury. I went to the bank and withdrew a significant amount of cash, placing it in a velvet-lined box. It wasn't for them. It was for the initial shock, the visual element of the reveal. Let them see the money, let them taste the possibility, before I snatch it back. I called Mr. Davies one last time. I need you on standby, Mr. Davies. I'll call you the moment they react. I need a clear voice of reason and the legal authority to back me up. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating calm. I was ready to face them, not as a victim, but as the architect of their immediate future. The dying mother was preparing her resurrection. They arrived promptly at 7 p.m., dressed with a seriousness usually reserved for funerals. Julian brought a bottle of cheap wine and a sympathy card. Vanessa wore a tailored black suit, looking ready to argue probate law. They scanned the room nervously, looking for signs of my decline or, more accurately, signs of cash or valuable items they hadn't yet claimed. Their concern was a fragile facade, a paper-thin veil over their avarice. How can two people I poured my life into become so utterly devoid of empathy? The dinner was tense. They made small talk, carefully avoiding any direct mention of my health, focusing instead on who should get the bigger share of David's record collection. I let them talk, their casual greed building the stage for my dramatic entrance. I raised my glass, my hand perfectly steady. A toast, I announced. To family. And to the future. They raised their glasses, their eyes glinting with barely concealed anticipation. I want to thank you both, I continued, my voice thick with false emotion, for the concern you've shown me during these difficult 6 months. Vanessa cut in quickly. We love you, Mom. We just want to see you at peace. Julian nodded, gulping his wine. Yeah, Mom. Tell us what you need. And about that inheritance. We want to do right by you. The double entendre was exquisite. They thought they were humoring a dying woman. I smiled, a true, predatory smile. I have already done what I need to do. I've made my final arrangements. And I've used my death fund exactly as I intended. The moment of truth was approaching, the air crackling with their unspoken expectations. I reached down and brought up the velvet-lined box I had placed beside my chair. The box was heavy, giving the illusion of immense value. I placed it on the dining table, the sound a dull thud that silenced them. Their eyes were locked on the box. They couldn't breathe. This is it. The jewels. The cash. The final will. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside, resting on the rich velvet, was not cash or jewels. It was a stack of official-looking, stamped, legal documents, accompanied by a single, worn photograph of Julian as a child. Their faces shifted from greed to utter confusion. What is this, Mom? Vanessa finally managed, her voice tight with disappointment. This, I said, tapping the papers, is the proof of my true legacy. It's the death fund in action. I picked up the stack of papers. These are not my will, my life insurance, or my final goodbye letters. These are debt instruments. Legal documents. I slid the top few documents toward Julian. Julian, these are the promissory notes, credit card statements, and the lien on your grandfather's cabin. Paid in full. By me. Using the $212,000 from my death fund, the silence was absolute. Julian's face went white, then mottled with a confused anger. Vanessa snatched the documents and began frantically skimming them, her lawyer's mind racing. The twist had landed. They had expected an inheritance. They got a clean slate for the least responsible one among them. The betrayal wasn't mine, it was the exposure of their own selfishness. Vanessa slammed the papers down. You spent it? You spent the entire fund on his reckless debt? Her voice was a furious hiss. Mom, that money was for your dignity. For your burial. For the legacy you were supposed to leave us. You were supposed to leave us the cash, not wipe out his loans. This is irresponsible. This is fraudulent. Her rage wasn't for me, that a dying mother, it was for the loss of her financial stake. Fraudulent? She thinks a mother saving her son is fraud? You were so worried about my funeral and your settlement, Vanessa, I said, my voice rising. But you never asked me how I was feeling. You never offered to spend one unpaid afternoon with me. You just calculated my worth. The ultimate family issue, the value of love versus the value of money. Julian didn't react with anger. He reacted with a terrible, gut-wrenching shame. He looked at the documents, then at the photo of his younger self. Mom, you bought my debt? You own it? He had finally grasped the magnitude of what I had done, and what I was doing. He realized I had not just saved him financially, but I had exposed the secret rot in his life, including the private creditor and the property lien he was too ashamed to tell me about. I bought your debt, Julian, I confirmed. And that makes you indebted to me. Not financially, but morally. You owe me a life lived with honesty and purpose. The debt isn't gone, it has simply transferred ownership. The revelation of the lie and the debt acquisition was his emotional rock bottom. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a decisive scrape. I walked to the window, took a deep breath, and turned to face them, my red dress a defiant splash of color against the somber room. And now, I said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face, for the final truth. The most important one. Vanessa was still breathing heavily, Julian was wiping his eyes. Dr. Chen is a magnificent actor. He is also a dear family friend. My aggressive lung issue? It was a lie. I am not dying, children. My health is perfect. My lungs are strong. I have, perhaps, another 20 years to live. The shock was instantaneous, a palpable wave of disbelief and dawning horror. Vanessa staggered backward. Julian simply stared, his mouth agape. The ultimate shocking discovery. Vanessa was the first to find her voice, her lawyer's training failing her spectacularly. You lied? To us? Your children? How could you be so cruel? Cruel? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Cruel was you asking about my will before my diagnosis was even confirmed. Cruel was you trying to sell my possessions while I was still drawing breath. I faked my death to find out who would mourn my loss and who would calculate their gain. I found out. You saw a profit margin, not a mother. Julian, however, was already reacting differently. He wasn't angry, he was relieved, then overwhelmingly ashamed. Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought I was losing you. And I panicked. I saw the difference. Vanessa was angry she lost the money. Julian was ashamed he lost his moral compass. I returned to the table, picking up the official debt documents. Julian, you are free of the banks and the loan sharks. But you are not free of me. The debt is mine now. And I will forgive the principal and the interest on one condition: you get yourself into therapy, you quit your reckless lifestyle, and you take the first job offered to you for a full year. No more borrowing. No more secrets. You pay me back with your good behavior, starting now. He stood up, walked to me, and for the first time in 10 years, hugged me like the boy who crashed his bike. A real, honest hug. A small, necessary victory. Vanessa remained standing, frozen, her face a mask of furious calculation. And what about me, Mother? What do I get for sitting by your bedside for 6 months? You get nothing, Vanessa. Nothing but the harsh reality that you prioritized a potential inheritance over the life of your mother. You get the knowledge that you failed the test. This was the most painful part, the family issue of a shattered bond. You are a brilliant lawyer, but a cold human being. Until you understand the difference between a balance sheet and a beating heart, I suggest you take a sabbatical from this family. Her betrayal was a risk-taker element that cost her dearly. The forbidden love, the debt, the property dispute, all were secondary to her calculated greed. 2 days later, I was back in Dr. Chen's office. He poured me a cup of tea, his eyes twinkling. Well, Eleanor. Your markers look excellent. Did the experiment yield the desired results? It was excruciating, doctor, I admitted, a genuine wave of exhaustion washing over me. But necessary. I saved my son from financial ruin and, hopefully, from himself. And I saved myself from living out my final years in a fool's paradise, surrounded by vultures. The loss wasn't my life, the loss was my illusion of family unity. What about the fund? He asked. The small reserve is for my real funeral, doctor. When it comes. And this time, I smiled, no one will know the exact amount. That money is for me and me alone. The secret of the fund's existence would remain, but its true purpose was fulfilled. 3 months passed. Julian had found a job, working as a junior project manager, humbling work for a man used to entitlement. He was in therapy, and he called me every night, not to ask for money, but just to talk about his day. He was a new man, grounded and sobered by the reality of his failure and the shock of my intervention. He had confessed the affair with Maria to his friend, and the fallout was painful, but contained. The ultimate twist, the threat of my death saved his life. He finally understood that the greatest debt wasn't the money, but the debt of love and respect he owed himself and his family. I was watching my son resurrect his life, and it felt like the most expensive, most worthwhile investment I had ever made. I hadn't heard from Vanessa. My calls went unanswered. The pain of losing her was real, a sharp, constant ache that no financial victory could soothe. She had chosen her path. The forbidden love and betrayal elements were contained, but the family issues lingered. I sat on the Persian rug that Vanessa wanted to sell, tracing the patterns with my finger. She will come back. She's too much of me to stay away forever. But she will come back humbled, not demanding. I wasn't waiting, though. I was living. I was planning a trip to Italy, using the remaining funds. My life wasn't defined by a diagnosis, real or fake. It was defined by the choices I made to protect the ones who still deserved it. My heartbroken love story was truly a love story, just not the one they expected. I stood at the same window where I had felt the cold dread of my initial lie. It was a sunny day, the kind that promised longevity. My family's drama had been a painful, necessary surgery. Julian was finding his footing. Vanessa was in the wind. And I was free. I was free of the death fund, and the burden of their expectations. I had stared into the heart of my family's darkness and chose to illuminate it with an act of radical, painful love. The price was high, a broken relationship with my daughter and the terrible guilt of deception. But the result was priceless, my son's second chance and my own liberation. 6 months, they said. Well, I chose to spend those 6 months building, not burying. I picked up the phone to book my flight to Rome. Eleanor Vance was finally ready to live.